Welcome back, Astro listeners, to the StarLady Soul Reader Network. This is your host, MediaMonk, and once again, after a little medical and family sabbatical with a renovation thrown in, this is MediaMonk, and I'm joined by StarLady. Hi, StarLady. Are you there?
Yes, I am.
All right. Well, we just wanted to send out our, well, not apologies, but certainly regrets on the fact that we had to attend a medical emergency for StarLady's mother. And she has recovered very well. She's getting her strength back. It kind of threw everything into the ringer for a while, I think, StarLady. You might agree with that. But we're back at the house now, and the house is torn up with the renovation, and we're hiding out downstairs trying to get a podcast in for everybody. So thanks for being patient, Astro listeners. I'll turn it over to you.
Pluto over my ascendant. What next? Yes, my mom is doing very well. I actually spent 2 weeks with my mom and dad, literally taking care of both of them 24/7. The first week that my mom was out of the hospital, so Pluto in Capricorn, taking care of your parents. But it turned out to be a very nice bonding with my mom and my dad and I. The changing of the guard when the adult child takes care of their elderly parents. So I feel like I have been out of the astrology world for the last 3 weeks, literally. So I have to kind of dip my toe back in and get into the rhythm of the planets again. I guess the one that sticks out the most right now is the Jupiter retrograde. But in the midst of that, over this next week, we've got that new moon of Aries coming, and we have Mercury making the third aspect to several outer planets as it finishes up the post-shadow of its retrograde cycle. So a little hindsight on that Mercury retrograde cycle. I had told listeners in our free Mercury retrograde webinar a while back that Mercury aspected every planet except Chiron, and it went retrograde just within degrees of almost conjuncting Chiron. So this Mercury retrograde aspected everything from watery, emotional Pisces. And so we still have Mercury in Pisces until April 17th. It will leave its post-shadow the day before, April 16th. So Mercury's making the third conjunction to Neptune. Let me do my math. Waxing sextile Saturn, waxing sextile Pluto, and waxing squares to Jupiter. And so we can continue working through all those mercurial details. We can continue to be having deep, deep conversations with people, and perhaps now they make a little bit of sense. Perhaps now we're understanding where others are coming from in the midst of the last month or so. For me personally, it was a very deep bonding time for our family. I've been close to my mom. My mom is really the glue that holds it together for Dad and 3 daughters, and she was the 11th of 12 children, so there's a gazillion nieces and nephews for my mother, and cousins for us. And so everybody really wanted to rally around my mother and send her blessings and prayers and food and flowers. And so it was a Piscean, this is what's deepest of value and meaning to us. My mother is a sweet, sweet woman and well loved and respected by everyone for all her Neptune and Virgo caring, let's say. So that's kind of, this Mercury retrograde in Pisces could be all over the place. You could be dealing with all the Virgo details of everything with the polarity. You could be dealing with all of the Piscean distortions of, neglect and avoidance and, disillusionment. And I don't want to be in touch with what's real. Just let me go check out and play. Pisces is the last archetype that, as I say many times, goes anywhere and everywhere. And so that's what this Mercury retrograde could be like for any of you. And as you go through this post-shadow, it might be paying attention to the house where the Mercury retrograde in Pisces took place, from 30 back to 16 degrees Pisces. The house might bring in some details of how it's actually playing out for you in any particular way. Mercury conjunct Neptune, which we just had a day or two before this recording, that deep inspiration and what's really a priority in your life. And this is going to be followed by Tuesday, April 9th, Venus in Pisces making a conjunction to Neptune at about 17 degrees. The third Mercury-Neptune conjunction was 17 Pisces. Now Venus catches up at about 17.5 degrees Pisces. So where is that Mercury stationary direct point in your chart? Because that's within the degree of all this taking place. Those are your ahas with your deepest values possible and how you want to love on the deepest levels possible. New moon is Friday, April 5th, 15 degrees Aries, and of course we missed that spring equinox in the evolutionary astrology mantra. I initiate with consideration of others. I initiate Aries with consideration of others, the Libra polarity. And so the new moon in Aries has us wanting to just jump forward, initiate things, race ahead. This is a time period to do it. Just so happens in 2019, we also have it with Mars in Gemini. And so it adds to this busy Mercury retrograde, and just it's like what we're doing here on the cliff, literally juggling all the pans in the fire right now. Mars is in Gemini, March 31st through May 15th, all month of April. A month and a half of Mars in Gemini. So it literally is, how much can you juggle right now? How many details can you keep going? The entire upfloor, the entire upstairs, main floor of our house is literally, physically torn apart. And I've heard people say you got to put up with dust everywhere. Well, yeah, that is literally what's going on. And the downstairs is getting so stuffed, I don't know if we're going to be able to walk in it by the end of the week. So I can relate to this whole Mars in Gemini, and it's kind of like with Jupiter getting ready to go retrograde in Sag, it's just like what rises to the top with priorities, what kind of bubbles to the top. And it can almost feel, by the way, Jupiter retrograde April 10th, next Wednesday, at 24.5 degrees Sag. Go ahead, MediaMonk.
It'll be opposite that moon in Gemini. So Jupiter moon hits are always busy, and Mars is going to be approaching, coming from early degrees Gemini, approaching that point. So, and all that's going to be square that Pisces energy, Venus, Mercury, Neptune. So, you're right. It brings along a pretty broad and optimistic outlook about things, but it can feel busy, and the lack of concentration, or maybe an inability to focus on the smaller details, could lead to some errors, mistakes, etc.
We won't have the Mercury in Gemini opposition to Jupiter until May 5th, and help me pronounce it, Cinco de Mayo?
Cinco de Mayo, right? Yeah, well, I was talking about the square, of course, of Jupiter to Mercury. on the event chart of Jupiter retrograde.
Oh, yes, on the 10th. Here's Mars in Gemini. I'm jumping ahead to when it actually makes an opposition to Jupiter. So my point is, it is going to be a mixture of left brain, right brain, because Jupiter's in its own sign, Sagittarius. And as Jupiter goes retrograde, it's going to point to Gemini. And so as we go back and forth, handling all of the left brain details that are spontaneously coming up through Mars in Gemini, Jupiter also will be doing the review of what is truth and what is most important to me. Where do I see things in my world? How do I align myself with my world in more natural ways? And so it is kind of handling all the busyness of Mars and Gemini. At the same time, we kind of step back with Jupiter turning retrograde in Sag and go, what's it all mean? What's it all about? What's most important? How do I handle the important conversations in my world? That's the other thing that we can just find going on throughout the whole month of April, but also especially during this first half of April. Mercury direct, post-shadow in Pisces, meeting up with Neptune in Pisces, the Jupiter orb of last quarter square to Neptune in Pisces, and then Mars, hanging out opposite in Gemini, that that mutable quadrant is highly activated. And communications will be one of the things that is very activated. Be gentle with yourself and with others. And it's okay to have the conversation more than once. And it's okay if somebody gives you an answer and you're brain fractured and you have to ask the question a second or third time again to let it soak into the brain cells. It's okay. Try not to be too abrupt with someone if you've given them an answer and they didn't hear it or didn't comprehend it. We don't have any of that going on, do we, MediaMonk?
Only last night and today. And because Jupiter does expand every aspect of life, but primarily this retrograde could really expose where those communication needs are. We all have our own traits and behaviors that we kind of default to. Those will really be revealed in this mutable quadrant.
Yes.
Jupiter always wants to be philosophical, broad-minded, happy camper, and yet it can almost do so looking down or talking down to other people. So it's we have to welcome people of all ages, social status, religions, cultures, all those Jupiter words with this Jupiter retrograde.
Yeah, that might be the theme for the month. The planets that turn retrograde in April are Jupiter, April 10th, Pluto, April 24th, and Saturn, April 29th. And as you know, those are the three big planets that are going to meet in the skies next year in 2020. And here are their retrograde cycles almost in tandem. Jupiter and Saturn have 4-month retrograde cycles. Pluto has a 5-month retrograde cycle. So while they all turn retrograde together, Pluto lags, turning direct later in the year. Jupiter retrograde, by the way, is April 10th through August 11th. Jupiter always is retrograde about 10 degrees, so from 24 to 14 Sag. And so, Jupiter retrograde is trying to throw off limitations of truth. EA talks about this, how we all have our personal truth, and it can be something that is real and truthful for us. but does it align with broader, timeless, universal truth? And all you have to do is take a look out there at all the many different types of religion and how we will align with the truth of that religion, but that may not be aligned with, again, universal, timeless truth, or what we call natural law. And all we have to do is look out there on the political landscape and see how someone's aligning their self with this fact is the truth, and your fact is a lie. And it can be where both don't line up with what we might call natural universal laws. It's that whole spectrum of giving, sharing, and including versus taking, hoarding, and excluding.
Oh.
And that's going to be that will be a big debate during this Jupiter retrograde, not only this year in Sag, but next year, next spring, next summer, with all three of them retrograde in Capricorn. We will really see major conversations over the next few years with, how do we literally take care of the least of us, and how diametrically opposed some religions can espouse to be, yet actions don't match up with that in the political landscape.
Isn't it interesting to note that we got, we have, you're referring obviously obliquely to this immigration issue. The more and more we talk about a larger and taller and badder wall and wanting to shut down borders, isn't it interesting that 100,000, many more people are actually trying to cross the border now than ever. It's almost like this Jupiter retrograde.
They're all trying to come before there is a literal wall.
It'll expose that you get what you ask for, and guess what we're getting? All the bad boys want to get in, and all the families want to get in, and it's going to create a disaster. We've, in a way, politically, we've created a bigger disaster than what is really occurring on our southern border. Jupiter.
Very salient point, MediaMonk. Jupiter rules Sagittarius, and Sagittarius, 9th house, and Jupiter is the archetype of mass migration.
Cultural assimilation.
Long distance journeys. Searching, it's one of the archetypes of searching, for your tribe. And, searching for it on a philosophical basis. And, the other thing that is driving the mass migration, in addition to the communications finally trickling down to the poorest of the poor in Latin America that they're closing the border, we better go or we won't get in. The other thing that is driving it is climate change. And that whole area is, being devastated with being unable to make a living off the land anymore. The political landscape going more corporate, but just those that are closest to the land not being able to make a living because of the effects of climate change down there. And that's the mutable quadrant. The mutable quadrant, Gemini, Virgo, Sag, Pisces, is what we relates to natural spiritual laws and principles. Not that all 12 archetypes cannot relate to it. They do. But, we espouse and learn it through the mutable quadrant. And so who's right, who's wrong? How, I like to say, how large can I make my arms in understanding? What's the broadest level of truth I can understand? And that's what Jupiter asks us to consider during its retrograde cycle. Now, another interesting aspect, there's a lot of aspects next Wednesday, April 10th, Sun square Saturn, Jupiter retrograde, Moon's heavily active in Cancer, well, Gemini Cancer. But I wanted to talk about the Sun square Saturn. April 10th, Sun at about 20 degrees Aries is going to square Saturn, slowing down at 20 degrees Capricorn, before it turns retrograde at 20 degrees Capricorn. But the United States was born with a Sun-Saturn square. You know, July 4th, the Sun in Cancer. I think it's about 12 degrees Cancer is our U.S. sun sign. And natal Saturn at 11 degrees Capricorn. And so here is another Sun-Saturn square in opposite signs, activating the cardinal grand cross in the natal U.S. chart. And again, a lot of astrologers have always thought with that Sun in Cancer square, Saturn in Libra, is the United States inclusive or exclusive? And that's been one of the battles of our whole identity, Sun, as a country. And so that Sun in Cancer, are we, nurturing of others, or are we, the distortions of Cancer, fearful and insecure, and then we get very protective and nationalistic? Libra is always that balance of fairness and equality, or striving towards that. But Libra can be the extremes of inequality. And so, again, that's what that natal U.S. Cancer, Libra, Sun, Saturn has, always went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. So as a country, we go through time periods where we're very sharing, giving, sharing, and including, okay? And then we go through time periods where we're, taking, hoarding, and excluding, and we get just the opposite of all that. So I think, we've been doing it through the whole length of our time period as a country, but every so often we have these little spikes in recognizing, well, how are we going to do all this? How are we going to see ourselves and our identity as a country? So the Sun in Aries square Saturn in Capricorn can bring this into a focus here in April for a little bit. One other thing that is going on is that transiting Pluto in the sky at about 23 degrees Capricorn is going to have a conjunction to the transiting South Node in Capricorn. And it will only have one Pluto conjunction to the South Node. Saturn will have 3 conjunctions to the South Node, and then Jupiter will have one early 2020. And so Pluto conjunct the South Node, 23 degrees Capricorn. Here we are as a country. Our natal Pluto is 27.5 Capricorn. So it's only 4 degrees away. And so here we are dealing with our past, South Node, Capricorn, as a country, and dealing with that past on deep emotional levels. What is the soul of this country? We are all a nation of immigrants, unless you're an indigenous native.
Isn't it interesting that we're and who is revisiting all those parental and family issues more so than you? But even our illustrious president, he can't even tell the truth about where his father was born with this. This has got to be part of the picture somewhere. He's announcing that his father was born in Germany when his grandfather was. Of course, Fred Trump was born in New York, Brooklyn, New York. So it's like there's a little Capricornian moment, trying to hide, trying to act like an immigrant while he's keeping all the other immigrants out. To me, it's just bizarre.
I must say, listeners, for the 2-3 weeks that I was with my mom and dad, we made a conscious choice to just stay away from the news, just so that my mom could focus on, healing and emotional peace and, whatever's going on in the world, great, but let's just cocoon as our family and just really focus on nurturing, loving, etc. It was a very wonderful time period, and I have returned and have maintained my stepping back from the television. I'm not, I'm keeping up with the news on my phone, but I prefer to read it than watch it. So I have a degree of separation, I guess you would say, and just being able to do some of that Jupiterian detachment and not get so wound up. This Jupiter retrograde goes over Donald Trump's natal south node and moon in Sag, and it opposes his Uranus north node and sun in Gemini. And you can love me or hate me, you can let this podcast go, but I hope his ass gets burned. I've always said it's about the money with him. I've never thought that politically there was the will within this country to really call a cheater on the carpet, because we have too many in the Pluto and Capricorn political class that are that way. There's a lot of them that abuse the financial systems. But sometimes the axe falls on the tallest tree, and I don't care how long it takes into the 20s, but I think there's enough states that'll come after his financial shenanigans that he's not going to get away with it. So Jupiter retrograde here may expose some things for this gentleman, and
his tax returns have already been subpoenaed. They just subpoenaed them this week.
Well,
and from 2013 to 2018. So we'll see.
Well, we reap what we sow, and sometimes on that broad consensus level, it just has a lag time. It just takes a fairly long time. But back to Pluto conjunct that south node in Capricorn. How do you find natural, healthy self-responsibility? That's what we're being asked to do. We can distort it into suppressing the past. I don't want to look at it, blaming someone else, wanting to have all the control to kind of feel secure. But it comes down to reaching and achieving healthy self-responsibility. And then from the perspective of natural law, how do we teach another person to fish, to use the biblical phrase? How do we empower others rather than take power away or have power over? Okay, I will just kind of let politics rest for a moment.
Okay, well, that's a great to be. I'm glad we tipped our toes back in the water, so to speak, with a good podcast. Thank you, StarLady. I just want to announce that I'm upgrading our EA introductory workshop right now, including some nice documentation that goes along with 8 videos. That is really kind of the Reader's Digest version of the EA course. If you're interested in purchasing that, just go to the website, go to that Learning Paths page, which is the last item on the homepage menu line, and take a look at the EA intro for a very affordable price. You get 15 hours of content, all the PDFs that I'm going to post today. So consider that if you want to take your next step into the journey to the core of your soul with evolutionary astrology. So on behalf of StarLady, this is MediaMonk. See you next week on the StarLady Soul Reader Network. Until then, move with joy and a lot of passion on that never-ending journey to the core of your soul.